Cold War by S.T. Wallace. The rain drummed a relentless rhythm against the window pane of Alice's small London flat. She sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by strewn papers and a dusty, time-worn box. Her fingers traced the edges of the yellowed envelopes, each bearing a foreign postmark, each a whisper from a life she never knew her mother had. Alice's heart raced as she opened another letter, the scent of old paper and ink permeating the air. The words were in German, a language Alice barely remembered from her childhood, but the name caught her eye immediately: Heidi. Her mother's name before she became Helen, before she crossed borders and oceans. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Alice murmured to herself, though the question was aimed at the past. Her eyes scanned the letter, piecing together fragments of a history shrouded in secrecy and danger. The letter spoke of shadows and betrayals, of meetings under moonlit skies, far from the prying eyes of the Stasi. It mentioned a plan of defection. Alice's breath caught as she read the words. The wall is not just stone, but silence and fear. "I need to know more," she decided aloud, reaching for her laptop. The cold glow of the screen contrasted sharply with the warmth of the letters, but it was a gateway to answers. A quick search revealed little. The internet held no secrets of her mother's past. But the letters, these were real, tangible, and they pointed towards a truth buried deep within the archives of history. Alice's phone buzzed, jolting her back to the present. It was her colleague, Mark, his voice crackling with urgency. "Alice, we have a situation at the office." "I can't right now, Mark," Alice replied, her focus unwavering from the letters. "I'm onto something personal." "Is everything okay?" Mark pressed, his tone softening. "It will be," Alice assured him, though she felt the weight of uncertainty. "I just need to figure this out first." After hanging up, Alice returned to the box, pulling out a photograph. It showed a young woman with striking eyes, standing in front of a mural on the Berlin Wall. Her mother looked defiant, daring the world to confine her. "What were you fighting for, Mum?" Alice whispered, the photograph shaking slightly in her hand. The letters continued to unveil a clandestine world of espionage and escape, a world Alice never imagined her mother inhabited. One letter in particular stood out, its ink smudged, its message urgent. It spoke of a contact in the West, a man called the Owl. He was to provide safe passage and new identities. But the letter ended abruptly, as if the writer had to flee mid-sentence. "The Owl," Alice repeated, rolling the name over her tongue like a puzzle piece. It was a lead, albeit a cryptic one. She knew she had to pursue it, to peel back the layers of her mother's past. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered. With renewed resolve, Alice gathered the letters, placing them carefully back in the box. Her next step was clear. She needed to go to Berlin, to walk the streets her mother once walked, to feel the echoes of history under her feet. As she packed a small suitcase, Alice's gaze lingered on the photograph. "I'll find out what happened," she promised, to the image of her mother and to herself. The rain continued its steady patter, a backdrop to her unfolding journey. With a final glance at her flat, Alice stepped into the night, the letters safely tucked away, the whispers from the past guiding her towards an uncertain future. The wall's shadow. The train pulled into Berlin Hauptbahnhof, and Alice stepped onto the platform, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. The city's history whispered to her through the cold air, each breath a reminder of why she was here. As she emerged from the station, the skyline was a testament to resilience, the old and the new standing in stark contrast. Alice navigated the streets, her eyes sweeping over the remnants of the Berlin Wall. The graffiti-covered slabs stood as silent witnesses to the past, stories etched into concrete by countless hands. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the rough surface. "What secrets did you hold, Mother?" she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. She continued her journey, the Stasi Museum her destination. The building loomed ahead, a relic of Cold War paranoia. Inside, the air was thick with the weight of history. Exhibits lined the walls, each artifact a piece of a puzzle she was desperate to solve. A tour guide's voice cut through her thoughts. "Here we have the surveillance equipment used by the Stasi. Their network was extensive, reaching into every corner of East Germany." Alice listened intently, her mind racing. Each detail added depth to the shadowy past she was unraveling. As the tour concluded, Alice lingered behind, her eyes drawn to a small collection of personal items. Among them, an old photograph caught her attention. It was a group of young women at a party, laughter frozen in time. "That's her," Alice gasped, recognizing her mother's face. Her pulse quickened as she examined the photograph closely. An inscription on the back read, "For Freedom, E. 1983. "What was this about, Mother?" she wondered aloud, her mind a whirlpool of questions. Determined to find answers, Alice approached the museum's archivist, a bespectacled man with a kind smile. "Excuse me, do you have any records from this period?" she inquired, showing him the photograph. "We do, but access is restricted. Only family members of those involved can request to see them," he explained. Alice's heart leapt at the small victory. "I am her daughter," she asserted, her voice firm. The archivist nodded, disappearing into the depths of the archives. Minutes felt like hours as Alice waited, her mind running through possibilities. Finally, he returned with a file, its edges worn with age. "These are the only records we have. I'm afraid it's not much, but perhaps it will help." Alice opened the file with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the documents. Among them was a letter written in her mother's handwriting, the ink faded but legible. It read, "The wall's shadow hides more than it reveals." Tears welled in her eyes as she realized the depth of her mother's involvement. Steeling herself, Alice thanked the archivist and exited the museum. The evening air was cool against her skin, but her resolve burned hotter than ever. She knew her journey was just beginning, and the shadows of the past had only begun to reveal their secrets. As she walked through the streets of Berlin, Alice felt a connection to her mother stronger than ever, each step echoing with the promise of discovery and the hope of uncovering the truth hidden in the wall's shadow. Ghosts of East Berlin. The rain tapped gently against the window of the small Berlin cafe where Alice sat, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The world outside was a blur of gray, matching the uncertainty swirling in her mind. She glanced at the clock, knowing her appointment was due any minute. The door opened with a subtle jingle, and an elderly man stepped inside, shaking off his umbrella, eyes searching the room until they landed on her. "You must be Alice," he said, his voice warm yet laced with an undercurrent of gravity. "Yes, thank you for meeting with me," she replied, gesturing to the seat opposite her. Otto nodded, lowering himself slowly into the chair, his movements deliberate, like someone accustomed to carrying burdens unseen. "Your mother was a remarkable woman," he began, his eyes distant as if peering into the past. Alice leaned forward, eager to bridge the gap between her and the enigmatic figure her mother once was. "What can you tell me about her work in East Berlin?" she asked, her tone eager yet restrained. Otto took a deep breath, his gaze meeting hers, the gravity of his words hanging in the air. "Back then, the city was a cauldron of secrets," he said, his voice growing hushed. "Your mother was involved in one of the most dangerous networks smuggling information across the Iron Curtain." Alice felt her pulse quicken, the weight of his words sinking deeper. "She never spoke about any of this," she murmured, her voice a mix of awe and confusion. Otto nodded, understanding etched into the lines of his face. "She couldn't. It was too dangerous. One wrong move and it could mean the end for everyone involved," he explained, his eyes darkening with memories. The cafe seemed to shrink around them, the hum of conversation fading into the background as Otto continued. "We used to meet in the shadows, always at different locations, never the same place twice. The paranoia was constant, but your mother, she was fearless." "I wish I had known her courage," Alice admitted, her voice soft. Otto reached across the table, his hand resting briefly on hers. "You have her courage. It's why you're here, isn't it? To find the truth?" he said, his gaze steady. Alice nodded, feeling the connection to her mother strengthening through each revelation. "I need to know what happened to her," she insisted, her voice firm. Otto leaned back, considering her words carefully. "There are still those who remember, who might not welcome your inquiries," he warned, his tone grave. "But I will help you as much as I can." Alice smiled, gratitude mixing with the resolve that had brought her here. "Thank you, Otto. I can't do this without you," she replied sincerely, feeling the weight of her mother's legacy pressing upon her shoulders. The rain outside had intensified, but Alice felt a flicker of warmth within, a beacon guiding her through the storm of her mother's past. As they spoke, the stories of espionage and bravery painted a vivid picture, a mosaic of courage and sacrifice that Alice was only beginning to understand. With Otto's help, she knew she was one step closer to uncovering the truth hidden within the ghosts of East Berlin. Encrypted messages. Alice sat at her mother's old oak desk, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings on its surface. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the stack of letters she had painstakingly sorted. One particular envelope caught her eye, its paper thicker than the others. "What are you hiding?" she murmured, gingerly opening it. Inside, she found a folded sheet with lines of seemingly random letters and numbers. Each character was meticulously penned, hinting at a hidden purpose. Alice's heart quickened. She flipped through the pile, discovering more sheets with similar cryptic inscriptions. This is more than just correspondence, she realized. Her mind raced as she recalled stories of wartime codes and espionage. Could these be encrypted messages from her mother's past life? She needed answers, and quickly. "I have to find someone who can decipher this," she concluded, reaching for her phone. A few calls later, Alice was driving through the bustling streets of Berlin, her destination a small, unassuming office in a quiet neighborhood. The sign read, "Edgar Fisher, Cryptography Consultant." She took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. Edgar Fisher was a man in his early 50s, with a sharp gaze and a cluttered desk filled with books and papers. "Ms. Morgan?" he inquired, extending a hand. She nodded, shaking it firmly. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," she said. He motioned for her to sit. "You mentioned something about encrypted letters?" Edgar asked, adjusting his glasses. "Yes," she replied, handing him the sheets. "They belong to my mother. I believe they might contain information related to her defection from East Berlin." Edgar leaned forward, examining the characters with a practiced eye. "This is a classical cipher," he said slowly, tracing a finger along the lines. "But it's layered with additional encryption. Very clever." "Can you decode them?" she asked. Edgar nodded, pulling a notebook from a drawer. "It will take some time, but I can certainly try," he assured her. "Thank you," she said, feeling the weight of anticipation mix with hope. As Edgar worked, Alice's mind drifted back to her mother, picturing the young woman she had seen in photographs, full of mystery and courage. What had driven her to such lengths? What secrets had she taken to her grave? Hours passed, the room filled with the sound of pencil scratching on paper and the soft hum of a desk lamp. Finally, Edgar looked up, his expression a mix of satisfaction and concern. "I've decoded part of it," he announced. Alice leaned forward, her heart pounding. "What does it say?" she asked breathlessly. "It mentions several names and dates," he replied. "Some are linked to key figures in the East German government. Others," he hesitated, "are places tied to significant historical events." Alice's eyes widened, the implications dawning on her. "Are you saying my mother was involved in something monumental?" Edgar nodded, his expression grave. "It appears so," he confirmed. The room fell silent as Alice absorbed the revelations. Her mother had not only been a defector, but a pivotal player in a hidden chapter of history. "We need to know more," she said, her voice resolute. "These messages could change everything." Edgar nodded in agreement, already preparing to delve deeper into the remaining codes. "I'll continue working on the rest," he promised. "There's more to uncover, I'm certain of it." Alice stood, thanking him once more, her mind a whirlwind of possibilities and questions. As she left the office, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The echoes of the past were growing louder, and she was determined to follow them to their source. The defector's tale. The rain fell in a steady rhythm against the cobblestone streets of East Berlin, a city cloaked in shadows and whispers. Katarina stepped out of the dimly lit cafe, her trench coat tightly wrapped around her to ward off the chill of the October night. Her heart raced, but her expression remained calm, a skill honed by years of subterfuge. She glanced around, her eyes scanning the street for any sign of the Stasi agents she knew were never far behind. A figure emerged from the shadows, his features obscured by the brim of his hat. He approached Katarina with deliberate steps, his voice barely audible above the rain. "The package is ready. Do you have the papers?" "Yes," she replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She slipped a small, worn envelope from her pocket and handed it over. "Make sure it reaches the right hands." The man nodded, tucking the envelope into his coat before melting back into the darkness. Katarina watched him go, her mind already calculating her next move. The cafe was a known meeting spot, but she couldn't linger. She turned on her heel, her footsteps echoing in the quiet alleyway as she headed toward the safe house. Inside the safe house, Katarina sat at a wooden table, the dim light casting long shadows across her face. She unfurled a map, tracing her finger along the routes she had memorized. This was more than a mission, it was her life's work. "I have to succeed," she murmured to herself, her thoughts drifting to the consequences of failure. Her mind wandered to the faces of those she had left behind, her family in the West who knew nothing of her true occupation. The weight of her dual identity was a constant companion, but one she bore with pride. Every step she took brought her closer to freedom, not just for herself, but for millions trapped behind the Iron Curtain. The sound of footsteps outside the door snapped her back to the present. Katarina's hand moved instinctively to the revolver hidden beneath her coat. She held her breath, listening intently. "It's me," a voice called softly, the password for the night. "Come in," she replied, easing her grip on the weapon. The door opened to reveal a young man, his face familiar yet worn by stress. "The situation is deteriorating," he said, a note of urgency in his voice. "The Stasi are increasing their patrols. We need to accelerate the plan." "We can't rush this," she cautioned, though she knew he was right. The window of opportunity was closing, and with it, their chances of success. They spent the night poring over documents and radio transmissions, the room thick with cigarette smoke and tension. Each piece of intel was a fragment of a larger puzzle, one that could alter the balance of power in the Cold War. As dawn broke, Katarina stood by the window, watching the city awaken beneath a shroud of gray clouds. She knew what had to be done, the risks that lay ahead. "We move tonight," she declared, her voice carrying the resolve of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The day passed in a blur of preparations and covert communications, each task bringing them closer to the point of no return. As the clock ticked toward midnight, Katarina donned her disguise, a plain dress that blended with the crowd but concealed her true intentions. "Good luck," he whispered, his eyes filled with admiration and fear. "I'll see you on the other side," she promised, her words a vow as much as a hope. With one last glance at the safe house, Katarina stepped out into the night, the city alive with possibility and peril. She moved with purpose, her every action calculated, every gesture deliberate, as she embarked on the most dangerous mission of her life. The streets of East Berlin were a labyrinth of watchful eyes and hidden betrayal in the network. Alice sat in the dimly lit cafe, the air thick with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. The letter she clutched felt heavier with each passing moment. It was a missive that bore the weight of history and betrayal, penned by hands she once knew belonged to family. As she unfolded the crumpled paper, her eyes skimmed over the cryptic lines. They spoke of a breach, a mole within her mother's trusted circle, a whisper of treachery that had long since faded into obscurity. "I need to find out who," she murmured to herself, the resolve in her voice as firm as the streets of Berlin she had walked. The cafe's chatter faded into a dull hum as Alice's mind raced. Her fingers flicked through the letters, searching for any sign of the double agent's identity. A name, a gesture, anything that could unravel this mystery. "They say the past never stays buried." A voice interrupted her thoughts. Startled, Alice looked up to find an elderly man seated across from her, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling knowledge. "Your mother knew this more than anyone," he continued, his voice a mix of nostalgia and regret. "Who are you?" she asked, her tone guarded. "Just someone who remembers," he replied, leaning back into the shadows. "But I can help you if you're willing to listen." Intrigued but wary, Alice nodded slowly. The old man spoke of shadowy meetings and coded messages, his words painting a picture of a world where trust was a luxury. "There was a name," he said finally, his voice a mere whisper. "But the truth, like the night, is layered and complex. Be careful, Alice." With those parting words, he vanished into the crowd, leaving Alice with more questions than answers. She took a deep breath, her mind set on uncovering the truth. "I have to go deeper," she decided, her voice steady. Her investigation led her to a nondescript building tucked away in a quiet Berlin street, a place where secrets were traded like currency. "What are you looking for?" asked the archivist, his fingers dusted with the remnants of old files. "Records from the 1980s, she replied, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "Anything connected to my mother, Katarina." Hours passed as Alice combed through dusty records, her heart pounding with each new discovery. Finally, she stumbled upon a file marked with a familiar insignia, a symbol that had been etched into her mother's letters. "This is it," she breathed, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. The file contained names and dates, a web of connections that stretched across borders and decades. "This changes everything," she whispered, her eyes wide with realization. As she pieced together the puzzle, a name surfaced, a name that sent chills down her spine. It was someone she had trusted, someone close. "No," she gasped, the weight of the revelation crashing down on her. The room seemed to close in around her as Alice realized the depth of the betrayal. Her mother's network had been compromised, and now she was the key to unlocking the truth. "I have to confront them," she decided, her voice firm with determination. With new resolve, Alice set out to face the shadows of the past, ready to bring light to the secrets buried within the network. The smuggler, Alice stood at the edge of the bustling Berlin market, her eyes scanning the crowd for the man she had come so far to find. Her heart raced as she clutched a faded photograph of a young man with piercing eyes and a face hardened by time. A few minutes passed before she spotted him, now older and more grizzled, leaning against a vendor's stall. His hair was silver, but his eyes remained sharp, scanning the crowd for threats or opportunities. "Looking for someone?" he asked, his voice low and gravely as Alice approached. Alice nodded, showing him the photograph. "I believe you helped a woman escape East Berlin. Her name was Katarina." "I remember her," he said, glancing around before motioning her to follow him into a narrow alley. The noise of the market faded, replaced by the eerie silence of the alleyway. Inside, the smuggler pulled a crumpled pack of cigarettes from his coat, offering one to Alice. Katarina was brave, but the risks were immense. "Do you know what she was involved in?" "I have some idea," Alice replied, refusing the cigarette with a wave. "But I need to know everything." He lit his cigarette, the orange glow illuminating his face as he spoke. The plan was simple, but the stakes were high. She had to carry information that could have changed the tides of the Cold War. As the smoke curled into the air, Alice leaned in closer, hanging on his every word. "We used hidden compartments, false identities, every trick in the book, but the Stasi, they were everywhere. One wrong move and it was over." Alice listened intently, her mind racing with the implications. "How did you manage to get her out safely?" He exhaled slowly, the smoke drifting up into the dim light. "Timing and trust," he said. "We had a network, people willing to risk everything, but it was always a gamble." The smuggler paused, eyes distant, as if replaying the perilous journey in his mind. "Katarina was tough, but she was also lucky. We had a close call at the checkpoint, almost got caught." Alice felt a chill run down her spine, imagining her mother's narrow escape. "Thank you for helping her," she said, her voice softening. "Without you, I might not be here." "I did what I could," he replied, flicking the ash from his cigarette. "But you should know the past has a way of creeping back. There are still those who might be interested in what happened." His warning hung in the air like a specter. Alice nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. "If you're digging, be careful," he continued, his eyes locking onto hers. "Not everyone wants the past unearthed." "I have to know the truth," Alice insisted, her voice unwavering. "For her and for myself." The smuggler studied her for a moment, then nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her determination. "Then I wish you luck," he said, his voice a blend of respect and resignation. As Alice turned to leave the alley, the smuggler called after her. Remember, not everything is as it seems. People wear masks, even those you trust. With those words echoing in her mind, Alice stepped back into the bustling market, her thoughts a whirlwind of revelations and unanswered questions. She knew her journey was far from over, but with each step she took, the pieces of her mother's past began to fall into place, guiding her toward the truth she sought. A lost connection. The chill of the Berlin morning was still sharp in the air as Alice approached the modest office tucked away on a quiet street. She glanced up at the sign that read, Dr. Heinrich Bauer, Historian. This was the man who might help her unravel the tangled web of her mother's past. The door opened with a soft chime. Inside, the space was lined with bookshelves, each crammed with volumes of history and politics. Dr. Bauer, a bespectacled man in his 60s, looked up from his desk with a welcoming smile. "Miss Taylor, I presume? Please come in." Alice nodded, stepping forward to shake his hand. "Thank you for seeing me, Dr. Bauer. I appreciate your time." She took a seat opposite him, her mind racing with questions. "Your message mentioned something about Cold War espionage?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. "Yes, I found letters written by my mother. She was involved in something significant, but I need help piecing it all together." She handed him a folder containing copies of the letters and decoded messages. He studied the documents, his eyes narrowing with concentration. "These names," he murmured, tracing a finger over the text. "They belonged to key figures in the intelligence networks of the time." What kind of network was she part of? Alice leaned forward, eager for answers. "Your mother, Katarina, was part of a clandestine operation to transfer critical information to the West. It involved high-stakes espionage and many risks. Those involved had to be incredibly cautious." As he spoke, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place for Alice. Her mother's courage, the danger she faced, it was all becoming clearer. You see, the information she carried had the potential to alter strategic decisions on both sides of the Iron Curtain. It was not just about military secrets, but also about political machinations, alliances, and betrayals. "And she was right in the middle of it," Alice whispered, feeling both pride and sorrow. Her mother's life had been a tapestry of secrets woven with the threads of history. "There's more," he continued, tapping the folder. "These letters suggest that she had a network of contacts across Europe, each playing a role in passing information." "Do you recognize any of the names or places mentioned?" she asked, her pen poised over a notebook. "Some, yes. This one, for example," he pointed to a name. "He was a known defector, but his role was never fully understood. Perhaps your mother's letters can shed light on his true involvement." Alice felt a shiver run down her spine. Each revelation was like a key turning in a long-locked door, opening new avenues of inquiry. "I suggest you visit the archives here in Berlin," he said, scribbling an address on a piece of paper. "They might have more records that connect the dots." "Thank you, Dr. Bauer," she said, her voice tinged with appreciation. "This has been incredibly helpful." She stood, feeling the weight of new knowledge pressing on her shoulders. "Remember, Miss Taylor," he said as she headed to the door, "history is not just about the past. It's about understanding the present and shaping the future." With those words echoing in her mind, Alice stepped out into the bustling streets of Berlin, her resolve stronger than ever. She was no longer just unearthing her mother's past. She was finding her own place within it. Codes and ciphers. The gray light of dawn filtered through the curtains as Alice sat hunched over a cluttered desk, papers strewn in organized chaos. She had been reviewing the letters for hours, each one a fragment of her mother's clandestine life. A soft yet insistent knock at the door broke her concentration. "Alice, may I come in?" Jack, the cryptographer she had enlisted, stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the array of documents. "Of course, Jack," she replied, offering a weary smile. "I think I've made a breakthrough, but I need your expertise." He sat beside her, his interest piqued. "Show me what you've got." Alice handed him a letter, its ink faded but still legible. She had identified a pattern, a series of numbers interspersed with seemingly random words, revealing something more than just personal correspondence. "This looks like a classic book cipher," Jack observed, adjusting his glasses. "If we can identify the key text, we might unlock the message." They worked side by side, the room filled with the rustle of paper and the soft tapping of keys as Jack inputted data into his laptop. As dawn turned to day, a coded message began to emerge, each word carrying the weight of untold secrets. "There," Alice said, pointing at the screen. "That's not just a date, it's a location and time for a meeting that never happened." August 12, 1984, 3 p.m. Tiergarten, Jack read aloud, his eyes widening. But Tiergarten was heavily monitored. Why would they choose such a risky place? Alice's heart raced as she pieced together the implications. Her mother had arranged to meet someone important, but something must have prevented it. This could be the key to understanding her mission, Alice mused, her voice tinged with hope. But who was she supposed to meet, and why didn't it happen? Jack leaned back in his chair, considering the possibilities. Perhaps the meeting was compromised, he suggested, or maybe the person she was supposed to meet was the double agent. Alice nodded, her resolve hardening. "I need to find out more about August 12th, she declared. "Someone must know what happened that day." Together, they formulated a plan. Alice would delve into archives, seeking records of surveillance and any unusual activity in the Tiergarten on that date. Jack would continue to analyze the letters, searching for more clues hidden in plain sight. "We'll get to the bottom of this," Jack assured her, his voice steady. "Your mother's story deserves to be told." As Alice prepared to leave, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her mother's mission, once shrouded in mystery, was slowly coming into focus. Each letter was a breadcrumb, leading her closer to the truth. "Thank you, Jack," she said, her gratitude genuine. "I couldn't do this without you." He smiled, waving her off. "You're the one leading this charge," he replied. "I'm just here to help you connect the dots." With a final glance at the letters, Alice headed out, her mind churning with questions. She was determined to uncover the truth about August 12th, to finally understand the full extent of her mother's mission. The answers were out there, waiting to be found. The silent operative. The dim light filtered through the cracks in the blinds, casting shadowy bars across the dusty table where Alice sat. She stared at the recording device in front of her, its small, unassuming form a gateway to a past she was only beginning to comprehend. "I have to know," she whispered to herself, her fingers trembling as she pressed play. A soft crackle filled the room, then a voice, clear and familiar. "The information I carry is more than just numbers and names. It is the very blueprint of a future they fear." Alice's breath caught in her throat as she listened, the reality of her mother's dangerous life unfolding through the tinny speakers. Each word was a stone cast into the still waters of Alice's understanding, rippling outward to reshape everything she thought she knew. "I was tasked to smuggle the plans for their nuclear capabilities, their vulnerabilities. This is not just about borders, it's about survival." The gravity of her mother's mission struck Alice with full force. "Nuclear capabilities," she murmured, a chill creeping up her spine as she realized the stakes her mother had faced. The recording continued, Katarina's voice weaving a tapestry of espionage, betrayal, and hope. Alice leaned forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "They must never know what I know. If they do, the entire balance could tip, and not in our favor. I have to get to the bottom of this." Alice resolved, her voice firm with newfound resolve. She paused the recording, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and possibilities. The room seemed to close in around her, the walls echoing with the weight of secrets long buried. Alice stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She needed to reach out to someone who could provide clarity, someone who understood the intricacies of Cold War politics and espionage. "I need to call Dr. Wallace," she decided, the name of the historian who had helped her before coming to mind. With each step towards the phone, Alice felt the pieces of her mother's life clicking into place, a puzzle she was determined to complete. She dialed the number with steady hands, the recording still playing softly in the background. "Alice, what have you found?" "I discovered a recording. My mother was involved in smuggling crucial information about nuclear capabilities," she explained, her voice barely containing her excitement and fear. Silence stretched between them as Dr. Wallace absorbed the revelation. "This changes everything," he finally replied, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. Alice knew she had crossed a threshold, stepping into a world where secrets were currency and trust was a rare commodity. "We need to meet," she insisted, knowing that the conversation needed to happen away from prying ears. "Tomorrow, my office," he replied, the urgency in his voice mirroring her own. As Alice hung up, she returned to the recording, her mother's voice guiding her through a labyrinth of deception. "If you're hearing this, it means I've succeeded, and there is hope for a future free from the shadows of the past." Tears welled in her eyes as she listened, her mother's courage and sacrifice a beacon in the darkness. Alice knew that the path ahead was fraught with danger, but she was no longer afraid. She had her mother's strength to guide her, and a mission of her own to complete. The sun dipped below the horizon as Alice prepared for the next step in her journey, her mother's voice echoing in her mind. The silent operative had spoken, and now it was Alice's turn to act. The last contact, the dimly lit cafe in the heart of Berlin, was bustling with quiet conversations and the clinking of coffee cups. Alice sat at a corner table, her fingers tracing the worn edges of a photograph. Across from her, the last living contact mentioned in the letters sat, his eyes shadowed with memories of a past he had tried to forget. "You must be Alice," the man said, his voice gruff yet tinged with curiosity. "I've waited a long time for someone to come looking for these secrets." Alice nodded, her heart pounding. "I need to know why my mother vanished after her defection," she replied, her voice steady but urgent. "You were the last person she contacted." The man's gaze flickered to the photograph. "Katarina was brave," he said, a hint of admiration in his voice, "but bravery alone couldn't shield her from the dangers she faced." He paused, as though weighing his words carefully. "In the letters, she mentioned a meeting that never took place," Alice pressed, leaning forward. "What happened?" The man sighed, glancing around as if the walls themselves might be listening. "There was a leak," he confessed, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Someone within the network sold her out. The meeting was a trap." Alice's breath caught in her throat. The pieces were starting to align, but the picture they painted was grim. "Do you know who it was?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who betrayed her?" "A name was never revealed," he replied, shaking his head slowly. "But there were whispers, a ghost within the ranks, someone with no face but many connections." Alice felt a chill run down her spine. And the information she carried. What was so dangerous about it? She inquired, trying to piece together the larger puzzle. Why was it worth all this risk? "It was about a secret operation," the man explained, his eyes narrowing as he recalled the details. "A plan that could have shifted power, changed alliances. It was a threat not just to the east, but to the west as well." Alice absorbed his words, the weight of her mother's mission settling heavily on her shoulders. "Do you have any idea where she might have gone?" she asked, clinging to a sliver of hope. "Any clue at all?" The man hesitated, then reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, crumpled note. "This was the last message I received," he said, handing it to her. "It mentions a safe house near the border, a place where she might have sought refuge." Alice unfolded the note, her eyes scanning the faded words. Even after all these years, the ink was a lifeline, a bridge to a past she was determined to uncover. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude and resolve. "This could be the key." The man nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "Be careful, Alice," he warned, his tone solemn. "The shadows of the past are long, and they don't easily let go." As Alice left the cafe, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The streets of Berlin seemed to mock her with their secrets, every corner whispering tales of espionage and betrayal. She clutched the note tightly, knowing it was time to follow the trail to its end, wherever it might lead. The Berlin conspiracy. The rain drummed relentlessly against the windows of Alice's Berlin hotel room, casting a symphony of whispers that seemed to echo her thoughts. Each drop was a reminder of the secrets she was on the verge of unraveling. Alice stood by the window, her eyes tracing the blurred outlines of the city beyond. "There has to be something more," she murmured, fingers tracing the edges of the decrypted letters spread before her. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her reverie. It was the cryptographer, Jonas, his expression a mixture of excitement and caution as he stepped inside. "I found something," he announced, barely containing his enthusiasm. He laid a sheet of paper on the table, pointing to a line of text newly deciphered. "This message mentions a meeting between officials from both sides of the wall," he explained. "It's unlike anything we've seen before." Alice's heart quickened. The implications were staggering. If true, these communications could alter the history she thought she knew. "Who were they?" she asked, leaning closer. "High-ranking officials," Jonas confirmed, gesturing to the names. "Some of them are still influential today." A chill ran through Alice as she realized the magnitude of the conspiracy she was uncovering. The letters spoke of clandestine meetings, shadowy exchanges of information meant to recalibrate the balance of power during the Cold War. "We need to find proof," she said, her voice steady. "Something that can verify these claims beyond doubt." Together they pored over the documents, searching for a clue, a lead, that might guide them to the truth buried beneath layers of deceit. "There might be someone who can help," Jonas suggested, his eyes flickering with a hint of uncertainty. "A former intelligence officer. He was mentioned in one of the letters as a contact." Alice nodded, her resolve firming. Every new piece of information brought her closer to understanding her mother's past and the dangerous game she had played. "Let's meet him," she declared. "We need to know everything he can tell us." The meeting was arranged for the next day in a dimly lit cafe tucked away in the shadows of East Berlin's imposing architecture. The air was thick with tension as Alice and Jonas approached the table where the former officer sat, his eyes scanning the room with practiced vigilance. "You're Alice, Katarina's daughter," he stated, his voice a low rumble that carried years of secrets. "I wondered when you might appear." Alice took a seat, her gaze unflinching. "I need to know about the meetings," she said, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. The man leaned back, a cautious smile playing on his lips. "Your mother was a remarkable woman," he began, his tone layered with nostalgia and respect. "Please," she pressed, "I don't have time for reminiscences. What were they planning?" The officer's expression hardened, his eyes darkening with the weight of his memories. "There was a plan," he admitted, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "A plan to alter the course of the Cold War by manipulating key decisions on both sides. Katarina was pivotal," he continued. "Her intel was supposed to be the trigger for a series of events that would have reshaped alliances." Alice's mind raced, grappling with the enormity of what she was hearing. Could her mother have truly been at the center of such a monumental conspiracy? "Why didn't it happen?" she asked, the urgency clear in her voice. "There was a leak," he revealed, his voice tinged with bitterness. "Someone within her circle betrayed her. The plan was compromised before it could be executed." The revelation hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of lost opportunities and what could have been. "And my mother?" Alice probed, her voice softer now, seeking a person. The cost of secrets. The room was dimly lit, shadows dancing across the walls as Alice sat hunched over her desk, the letters spread out before her like a fan of forbidden cards. Her fingers trembled slightly as she traced the inked words, each stroke a whisper from the past. The air was thick with the weight of unspoken truths. Suddenly, the silence shattered as her phone buzzed angrily on the table. Alice picked it up, her heart skipping a beat as an unknown number flashed on the screen. "Hello?" she answered, her voice steady but wary. A voice, deep and shadowed, crackled through the line. "Stop your investigation, Ms. McAllister. Some secrets are meant to remain buried." Alice's grip tightened around the phone. "Who is this? What do you know about my mother?" The line went dead, leaving only the echo of those chilling words. Alice stood frozen, the room suddenly colder, the walls closing in. She knew she was closer to the truth than ever, perhaps too close. Determined, Alice gathered the letters and slipped them into her bag. She had to meet the cryptographer again, to find out if any new patterns had emerged from the codes. As she stepped out into the bustling streets of Berlin, a sense of urgency propelled her forward. The city was alive with the hum of traffic and chatter, a stark contrast to the silence of her thoughts. She navigated the cobblestone paths, her mind replaying the mysterious call. Reaching the small cafe where she had arranged to meet the cryptographer, Alice scanned the room, spotting him at a corner table. "Alice, over here," he called, waving her over. "Thank you for meeting me again," she said, sliding into the seat opposite him. "I received a call. Someone threatened me. They want me to stop." "That means you're onto something significant," he replied, leaning forward. "Let's see what else we can uncover." The two of them pored over the letters, the cryptographer's brow furrowed in concentration. The calf around them faded away as they delved deeper into the labyrinth of codes. After what felt like hours, the cryptographer paused, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. "I think I've found something, a location and a date. It seems to correspond with a high-level meeting that was supposed to happen in 1984. Alice's heart raced as she looked at the decoded message. "This could be the key to understanding my mother's mission. I need to go there." As they gathered their things, Alice couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She glanced around the calf, her eyes catching a figure lurking by the door, their gaze fixed on her. "We need to be careful," she whispered to the cryptographer. "I have a feeling we're not alone." With a nod, they exited the calf, Alice's senses on high alert. The streets felt narrower, the shadows darker, as if the city itself conspired to keep its secrets hidden. As they turned a corner, Alice's phone rang again. She hesitated, then answered. The same voice from before issued a final warning. "This is your last chance, Alice. Walk away or there will be consequences." "No," she replied, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "I won't stop." As the call ended, Alice felt a surge of resolve. She was closer than ever to uncovering the truth about her mother, and no threat would deter her now. The cost of secrets was high, but for Alice, the cost of not knowing was even greater. Retracing footsteps, the rain began to fall as Alice stepped out onto the cobblestone streets of Berlin, its rhythmic patter echoing in her thoughts. She pulled her coat tighter, feeling the weight of her purpose with every step. The calf was here, Alice muttered to herself, standing in front of a modern bookstore that had replaced the old haunt. Her mother, Katarina, had visited this calf regularly, meeting contacts who might have held the key to her disappearance. Alice glanced at the photograph in her hand, a faded image of her mother sitting at a table under the calf's awning. She needed to find someone who remembered those days, someone who could fill in the gaps. Spotting an elderly man sweeping the sidewalk, Alice approached him. "Excuse me," she called out. "Do you remember a calf that used to be here, perhaps in the 80s? "Ah, yes," the man replied, pausing to lean on his broom. "The old calf Adler." "Many stories were shared in that place," he chuckled. "Why do you ask?" "I'm trying to trace my mother's steps." "She was a regular here," Alice explained, showing him the photograph. "Katarina!" he exclaimed, recognition lighting up his eyes. "She was a brave woman." Alice's heart skipped a beat. "She was always meeting with people, talking in hushed tones," he continued, his gaze drifting to the past. "Do you remember anything that stands out, anything unusual?" "There was a night," he recalled softly, just before the calf closed for good. The air was thick with tension, and there was a man, someone I'd never seen before, waiting for her. Alice felt the pieces of the puzzle shifting. "Do you remember what he looked like?" she pressed, leaning in closer. "Tall, dark coat, a scar on his cheek," he described. There was something about him, something that felt dangerous. A chill ran down Alice's spine. Could this man have been the double agent, the one who betrayed her mother? "Thank you," Alice said, her mind racing with possibilities. She handed him a small token of gratitude before continuing down the street. The next stop was a small hidden alley known for its shadowy past. Her mother had mentioned meeting someone here in the letters, a contact she trusted. As Alice entered the alley, she felt the walls closing in, memories of espionage and intrigue whispering in the air. The narrow passageway was lined with graffiti, remnants of a bygone era. At the end of the alley, a door led to a basement bar, its neon sign flickering weakly. Alice hesitated before pushing it open, the creak echoing ominously. The bar was dimly lit, the patrons few and far between. Alice's eyes scanned the room, searching for anyone who might recognize the name Katarina. She approached the bartender. "I'm looking for someone who knew Katarina from the 80s. The bartender looked her over. "Why do you want to know?" "She's my mother," Alice replied, her voice steady. I need to know what happened to her. The bartender nodded slowly. There are still some here who remember. Alice followed the bartender's gaze to a solitary figure in the corner, a woman with weathered features and eyes that spoke of untold stories. May I join you? Alice asked, approaching the woman with cautious optimism. Katarina's daughter? The woman guessed, her voice a mix of surprise and recognition. She spoke of you often. Alice felt a swell of emotions at the mention of her mother. Please tell me what you know, Alice urged, leaning forward eagerly. Your mother was involved in something big, the woman began. I was supposed to help her, but things went wrong. Alice's mind raced as she listened, piecing together fragments of a story that had been hidden for decades. Each word brought her closer to the truth and the chilling realization of what her mother had sacrificed. With renewed determination, Alice the unfinished business. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets of Berlin. Alice stood before the imposing facade of an abandoned building, her heart pounding with anticipation. She clutched the final letter in her hand, the one piece of her mother's past that had eluded her until now. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memories. Alice's footsteps echoed as she navigated the crumbling corridors, her flashlight flickering over faded wallpaper and broken furniture. She stopped before a door marked Archive, the paint peeling and worn. With a deep breath, Alice pushed it open. The room was lined with file cabinets and boxes stacked precariously high. She knew the information she sought was here, hidden among the remnants of a bygone era. I have to find it, Alice whispered to herself, her voice steady with resolve. She began her search, sifting through documents and photographs, each piece a fragment of a larger truth. Hours passed, the outside world forgotten. Finally, she unearthed a folder labeled Project Iron Curtain. Inside, Alice found pages of notes, transcripts, and a map with key locations circled in red. Her mother's handwriting was unmistakable, each word a testament to the risks she had taken. This is it, Alice murmured, her eyes scanning the pages, the information they tried to bury. As she delved deeper, she uncovered the truth her mother had sacrificed everything for a conspiracy to manipulate key events during the Cold War, orchestrated by powerful figures on both sides. Alice's breath caught in her throat. This could change everything, she realized, the weight of her discovery settling over her like a heavy cloak. Determined to honor her mother's legacy, Alice knew she had to act. She gathered the documents, stuffing them into her satchel. As she turned to leave, a noise from the hallway froze her in place. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice echoing in the silence. A shadow shifted, and a figure emerged from the darkness. It was the man who had warned her to stop her investigation. "I told you to leave this alone," he said, his tone a mix of warning and resignation. Alice squared her shoulders, refusing to back down. "The world deserves to know the truth," she replied, her voice unwavering. The man hesitated, then shook his head. "You don't understand the danger," he insisted, stepping closer. "There are people who would kill to keep this buried." "Then let them come," Alice retorted, clutching the satchel tightly. "I won't be silenced." His expression softened slightly, as if recognizing something in her determination. "Your mother was brave," he admitted quietly, "but bravery and recklessness are often one and the same." Alice's resolve only strengthened. "She believed in doing what was right," she said firmly, "and so do I." The man sighed, a mixture of respect and resignation in his eyes. "Then I wish you luck," he said, turning away. "You'll need it." As he disappeared into the shadows, Alice felt a surge of determination. She left the building, stepping into the chill of the Berlin night. Back at her hotel, Alice spread the documents across her bed, each piece a crucial part of the story she was determined to tell. She began drafting a statement, her mind racing with the implications of her discovery. "The world needs to know," she whispered to herself, fingers flying over her laptop keyboard. She contacted trusted journalists and allies, ensuring the information would reach the right hands. The truth her mother had fought so hard to reveal would finally see the light of day. As dawn broke over Berlin, Alice felt a sense of peace wash over her. Her mother's mission was complete, her legacy secured. And though the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, Alice was ready to face Doe. The end. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, ring the bell, and tell your friends about my listening library.